Hello and welcome to Ethical Leadership, Voices from Aotearoa, New Zealand, a podcast series commissioned by the Brand Picot Chair in Ethical Leadership, Aritahi, at Victoria University of Wellington, and produced by advisory firm Pocket Knife. This podcast series aims to demystify ethics and make ethical leadership a concept we all become more fluent in and a skill we all become more nimble with. My name is Hélène Malandin, Director of Pocket Knife, and it is my pleasure to be your host for this episode of our podcast series. Today I'm excited to be joined by Julia Pahina. Julia is an award-winning social entrepreneur and systems change strategist who's transforming the technology sector through digital equity, diverse representation, and bridging the AI divide. Julia co-founded Fale in 2022, a social enterprise that aims to increase representation and create pathways for Pacific people in technology. Fale's initiatives have already engaged over 4 million people online and more than 16,000 Pacific people in person via events and programming. Julia's career spans globally in New Zealand, Australia, the UK, and the US. Amongst other awards, Julia was recognized as a Kiwi Bank Spark Innovator of the Year semi-finalist in 2025 and an NZ High Tech Awards Inspiring Individual finalist in 2024. Julia also serves as a board director and advisor in both local and international roles, such as the Digital Council for Aotearoa, New Zealand, and the World Economic Forum Global Futures Council on AI and Humanity.
Well, it's my pleasure to welcome Julia on the podcast today. Julia Talofalava, a warm welcome to you.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. So, hey, we've got a few big topics to talk about today. And starting with AI, just a small one. There's of course a lot of noise about AI these days, Julia. Most conversations revolve around technical capabilities. People are exposed to things such as, market opportunities, the need or not for regulations. The general public is exposed to concerns around, trust and integrity and shift on the market, the workplace in particular, and what that means in terms of potentially job losses. So lots of quite unsettling and negative narrative and language there. In contrast, the words that you use to talk about AI are very different words. I hear you talk about indigenous wisdom and ancestral intelligence, and you talk about the community voices and their importance. So can you elaborate on this maybe and tell us a bit more about your approach to the messiness and contradictions of the AI world?
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I think first to start with, what even is AI? I think the marketeers of AI have done a great job at attempting to find a way that it blankets all things in one unified definition, when really there are so many more questions beyond that. So, artificial intelligence. Well, what is intelligence? Defined by who? Measured how? And then going into artificial intelligence, well, what are we looking at? Are we looking at machine learning? Are we looking at Gen AI? Are we looking at deep learning? Like, what are we actually discussing when we're talking about AI? And so I tend to look at the messiness of AI in terms of everything that we're discussing is still human made. It's still built by humans. The power structures are deciding what gets built and what doesn't get built. The power structures are deciding what data is used and not used. Guardrails are put into place and what aren't. And when we're thinking about AI, I think that what we tend to do is add almost more human language to the machine in order to create a level of closeness that it reflects and is something to be trusted, when really it's a Socratic parrot. It just mirroring and reflecting back how society already is today. And that is still with all of its flaws, with all of our issues, with all of our, injustices is being built into the machine. And so we really try and talk about, well, rather than thinking about this as a replacement to human intelligence, we really talk about how is this actually, there are things that are essential in being human and that are irreplaceable and that AI can never mimic or copy or embody. It will never have aura. It will never have presence. It will never have lived experience. And it won't ever be able to have ancestral knowledge or understanding. So we like to think about AI as a way that, yes, you might augment yourself. It may be complementary to you, but we really try and shy away from language that talks about it as the solution to all of humanity's problems, or it's going to take over every essence of what it means to be human, or even language that describes the brain as a computer and therefore AI can be like the brain. Like, that's just no, the brain and consciousness. There's so many questions that we still don't know around what is consciousness and how do we have it? So yeah, we really like to bring in the messiness, bring in the dialogue about questioning back and pushing back on the hype and pushing back on blanket terms and doing some more stress testing on the conversation as well.
Amazing. And so I'm hearing almost like it's about rehumanizing AI. It's about seeing the people behind the machine and the tech. Do you think there's something there about, is that helping maybe the people you work with to feel like they have control? Control is not necessarily a nice word, but in the narrative, which feels like most people may feel like they're lacking control or they're losing control. Is there something about finding the human behind the machine and finding the fact that at the end of the day, we've created it, we are designing it, we are evolving it?
Yeah. So we do try and really think about, rather than seeing AI as the solution, humans are the solution. How we want to imagine the future does not have to be shaped by the hands of only a few. We can decide how we want technology to unfold, how we want to work with it. We have agency and autonomy in that. And absolutely, in order to be able to push back against the system, to push back and question, you need to have a place from within you that has the confidence to do that, that has the courage to do that, that has the willingness to do that. To be a change maker, to be somebody that goes against the grain isn't something that's easy. It's not something that's enjoyable, and it's not something that often makes you have a whole bunch of friends either. So totally, when we're thinking about shifting your inner world in order to shape your outer world, that does come back to the work of Fibre, Fale, where we want our community to know that there are more of us that are asking deeper questions, that are asking critical questions, that are not just consuming what's being presented to us, but are actually saying, hold on a second, I have control, I have autonomy. Do I want to put my culture into this LLM, knowing that it's going back to big tech and they're going to be able to train their models on it, and my community is not protected in that? Actually, do I want to be given all of my customary knowledge into this product? Do I want, like, those are the types of things that we really encourage our community not to give them answers to, but to give them a space to know they're allowed to make that choice and be able to have friction with what's happening in technology. You don't have to blindly adopt or use the AI as a default. Be deliberate in what you give and what you withhold within yourself as an individual and for us as a community. And also to say, hold on a second. For example, if my industry, if my company is looking at full scale automation across the business, well, what is their best interest for me? And actually being able to feel confident enough to ask those questions around, okay, well, are you going to be reskilling me? Or are you ultimately just asking me to adopt this so that you're replacing me? So I think, again, just going back to, we know that in order to make those actions in the outer world, your inner world has to be feeling strong, because those are not easy conversations to spark up as an individual, let alone as an employee.
And how do you go about helping people raise these questions? You don't raise them for them. You take people, you join through finding these questions for themselves. And like, they can be quite confrontational questions. Can you tell us more about that leadership style of yours, which is helping people see the questions and helping navigate these questions for themselves, and messiness that comes with it because of the world you're evolving as well?
Totally. So some of Fibre Fale's best work has been in shifting mental models. That has been, from a systems change point of view, we have a really high level of impact in shifting mental models for our community. So we've done things like leadership camps. We've done things like content series, podcast series. We've got masterclasses online where a lot of this takes representation and growing a space to actually be able to step outside of the system and allow us to see itself. So when we start to work with our community to go back to do a little bit of a history lesson around, where did capitalism actually come from? Where did corporations actually come from? Where did society and economics, who decided the economic model of society? And when we actually peel all of that back, okay, so now how is that unfolding to racism we might experience in the workplace? So how is that unfolding to tech solutionism? To how is that unfolding in terms of being extracted for data, how is all of those links actually all connected and shaping the water that we're swimming in? And as we lift the lid, almost as you're shifting the mental models that ground a human and what they understand in the world, then you're shifting their belief system, which ultimately shapes how they then act and behave out in the world. Now, that stuff is messy. That stuff is hard. That stuff, you've got to be really careful what you open and then what you can safely close as well. Because when we start to actually challenge ourselves and going, hold on a second, that experience of a microaggression from a manager, for example, can actually be connected to colonization, and that can actually be connected to capitalism, and that can actually be like, there's a lot of different links around, well, why do we operate in such a transactional business world? Why is that opposed to some of our cultural values? Why are we not being respected fully when we're actually being able to provide more empathy in the workplace? And that's deemed as less likely to be a business leader. Like when we start to really ask those questions amongst ourselves within the container of Fibre, it allows for people to feel willing and open to actually go, I had that experience, or what about this situation? What was really happening there? Or maybe I was being used in this way. And with that actually starts again to shift almost like the tectonic plates that makes up somebody's understanding of the world. And then that flows into, it might not be overnight, and we're totally fine with that. It might take months, it might take years, but often that leads to people shifting how they want to operate within the system and where they place themselves to.
Yeah, well, that's a really important point, isn't it? Because you talked a lot about why, all these questions around the why and making sense of why we are where we are. But the last one you just made, which is the critical one as well, which is, and what can I do about it in this, right? So the sense-making journey is enormous. There's only so much one organization can do. What do you think the role of other leaders around you is in order to take people on board? Like, what does it say? Anyone needs to be a leader, maybe, in this situation?
I honestly believe in the power of smallness. So we have gone deep rather than wide. I think scaling wide is almost like a bit of a fallacy versus scaling deep. With our impact model, the proverb is "e so elefau," which is as one fiber connects to another, it forms a strong and unbreakable bond. So the purpose of Fibre Fale is, this is Fibre Fale, this is Fibre One. Here's a Pacific individual or a community, and the intention or the impact is actually in the strength that we are woven together. Now that creates our outcomes. Our outcomes are not to become a mat. Our outcomes are not to become a plat. The outcome is in the strength of the bond, which when you have created the bond within us, within the connection to our ancestors, you see an individual that then has more confidence in themselves. The number of individuals that have come into Fibre Fale have been connected with us and are now going out on their own entrepreneurship journeys is enormous. Now that for us is the ripple effect of Fibre Fale. And that for us also is the intergenerational effect, because just shifting one person isn't shifting one person, it's shifting one whole family. But ultimately, we do not anticipate that many people around them might be mirroring what we talk about and in the way we talk about it, because we are walkouts. Like in terms of systems change, we are the trailblazers that are deciding, I'm going to walk out of the current system to build the new. So there's not going to be that many people potentially around them that are saying the same thing. But if we have them well connected into one another, so creating cohorts, creating online communities, creating spaces for peer-to-peer mentoring, that is where we keep that connection really strong. And I've really started to see, like I just got a message from somebody today that I'm mentoring, and she just let me know, hey, look, I want you to know I'm working on my business. I'm soft launching it, and I haven't given up on what I'm doing, and I want you to be there for the physical launch. Now, I worked with her maybe 6 months ago, and she's just been working away, but she's mentoring somebody else that I'm also mentoring. So they're now connecting up. So it's kind of working in network effects, but on a much smaller scale. And I don't have an ambition of trying to hit like 100 people. Like, yes, we've actually reached over 4.4 million online and over 16,000 in person. But when I'm thinking about really that depth of bond, we're only going to be able to shift a small number, but that will still have compounding effect over time.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And I love the fact that you're bringing a system lens to your work. And you've talked already about in mental models, right? But also like that cultural heritage and that cultural understanding and wisdom that comes with it. How do you feel this is received in the, I know you sit on lots of different advisory boards. You've got lots of hats in terms of governance as well. How do you feel this is received in the wider world as it is, navigate systems as they are, and what do you see your role being there?
Yeah. I don't think the system's ready for organizations like Fale, to be perfectly honest. I think they find it easy to understand metrics like 10,000 people attended an event, 5,000 people went to this, 1,000 people have completed a course. But when you start to talk about mental models, when you start to talk about healing trauma, you start to talk about healing centered systems change and creating embodied understanding to where is the root cause of that stuff's a threat. That stuff's a threat to the system itself. When you start creating more people that are questioning what are they part of and why, and where does it all come from? So in some ways, we're really mindful of that. There was a time when I started doing Fibre Fale that I think there was a lot of youthful innocence, and a lot of people love to get behind a young person that wants to change the world. Like, it's got a strong heart story, and especially with my journey coming through the tech industry where I experienced sexism and racism, it's almost like a redemption arc. And people love a redemption story. But as I've started to understand more around the system myself, more around what are the different levers that hold systems in place and how some of them are immovable. And then I'm also looking at this guy, I'm not going to participate in, we're not going to just bring our people into this anymore. We're actually going to pull back and keep more for ourselves and start to evolve within us versus just participating in what's already there. Now that can have for different leaders, for different members, that becomes a little bit of more tension around that, because I'm not behaving in the way that maybe they thought I was going to, which is, okay, let's mobilize a huge number of Pacific people and let's all go work for tech and never ask questions. Let's just get the numbers up. Whereas that's not the purpose of my organization, nor me. That's just more bums on seats. That hasn't shifted the system. We might have more people participating in the tech industry, but to what level? Are they staying all at grads? Are they asking questions and moving upwards? Are they giving promotions? Are they pushing back on racism? So it's been a very interesting journey to see how long people are able to walk alongside you until your evolution starts to outgrow where they're at and where they're willing to grow themselves.
And I'm hearing what you're saying, something about, making people a little uncomfortable and being a little provocative, but also knowing when to push and knowing when to hold back, if I hear you well. Do you think that's part of what an ethical leader needs to know how to do well?
I've learned the hard way. Like, I would love to say that I could have my values completely on my blazer every single day at the same level every day. But I also am participating in capitalism. And I also still have to raise funds to do this work. And if I'm looking to do this work in my community and not put a price point to it because my work is about equity, then who's paying? Who's paying for this work? And so really being conscious of how do you operate with your own ethical code, knowing that there are some concessions that are almost non-negotiable in order to create the thing, to do the thing. You've got to make some different decisions, and those decisions are really, really tough. And I've learned that, again, I mentioned I learned that the hard way because I came into this with so much youthful innocence and naivety. I really thought, because I had worked over in the US, over in London, I really believed, like, okay, I'm back home, I'm doing social good, and then there'll be good people around me. Only good people will want to do social good, right? Right? No, I was wrong. Some people do it for status. Some people do it for savior. Some people do it for fame. I was so innocent to that. And I was just blessed, the 20-something-year-old, Julia, that just thought, oh, we're all in social good. If we wanted to be egotistical, we'd be back in the private sector, right? No, wrong. And I think that's part of it, is recognizing that there are people that operate within the space of values-led, of ethics, of systems change, of social good, that haven't done their inner work.
Yes.
They have not done it themselves. And they're almost more dangerous because then they're doing it without an awareness and a connection to their own mental models. And so when you come into this space and you're talking about systems change, and you're talking about social innovation and this, that, and the other, and you're talking about it that we need to be Indigenous-led, we want to be community-led solutions, which means the community decide, which means the power dynamic is not like this, it's like this, and then they start to get triggered by the language you're using, that's when my ethical leadership has to figure out, okay, what am I going to do in this position? Because I could stay really high on my values-led horse and I could try and stay really purist to this. And then if I drop off this relationship or if I drop off this opportunity for my community, then what? Who loses? And that has been one of the most challenging journeys I've ever gone on, especially as I'm walking into my 27, 28, like I didn't anticipate making those level of mental Olympics every day. Like there is no handbook. And also there is nobody that is walking alongside you behind the scenes in the darkness of those moments.
Yeah. Well, hearing you, it's so evident that it requires so much emotional energy. And like you say, like running that marathon every day and trying to find that place you mentioned to me before. I really like that active hope. How do you keep hope and be active in nurturing this hope while being fully aware of the messiness around you, right? How do you pass this on as a leader without hammering people who don't want to hear about things like system change and social innovation and, like people who are in the doing, who are in it? How do you make this accessible to them and empower them to have that active hope?
Yeah, it's really tough. It's really tough, especially in the online world where quite often people feel very confident to push and probe, but aren't able to have discourse with you. So it's very easy for people to send you a direct message and ask you, well, as Pacific people, should we be using Gen AI at all? If we know that it's built on the backs of extracting from other Indigenous communities. And who's to answer that? I can't answer that for you. That would be wrong of me to try and answer that for you. And if anything, what I really lean into is having those discussions more openly with us all, saying everybody has their own autonomy and agency when it comes to this decision. There is not one size fits all. And yes, we are part of a community of people that have certain values that have guided our culture. And we all have different ways of expressing that. We all have different needs. We all have different contexts which we're operating in. We all have different outcomes which we're trying to seek in the world and seek in our own lives. And so I really, really tend to talk about the future is undefined and it is not owned by any one person. And choosing to do nothing is still a choice. And so you have to reconcile for yourself that by choosing to be a passive participator in how the world unfolds, that is a choice that only you can live with. And I choose to live an active life where I'm questioning, where I'm pushing back. And it is a much harder path to walk down when you are choosing to define how you want your future to unfold versus just receiving what someone else has decided for you. But at least then I can look back and be so proud of how I lived in the driver's seat of my life and I narrated my life as well.
Yeah, thank you. And do you want to share what has taken you to where you are now, making that difficult choice to be this ethical leader? Do you want to share a little bit about your personal story? You've already mentioned working in the corporate world and how that shaped you. What else made Julia who Julia is today?
Yeah, well, I have a beautiful and incredible and powerful mum who was a single mum. So I brought up with a single mum from 3 weeks old, and she is a magnificent and powerful woman who, against all odds, brought me up on her own. And against all odds, I'm Samoan, Chinese, and British, and my mum is British. She's about 5'4", tiny little woman with blonde hair and blue eyes, and she experienced a lot of hardship bringing me up on her own, and it, obviously as a brown baby and a white mum, there were a lot of judgments she's experienced by society, by New Zealand, and a lot of hardships. And so I grew up with a sense of seeing every day somebody fighting against discrimination every day for her, for us, to enable her to try and give me a better life. So knowing I was brought up by a fighter, by a warrior, that's definitely one way that shaped Julia. But she also always told me that the world is my oyster. And I was very lucky, very, very lucky that my mum tried to and did successfully send me to one of the best high schools down in Christchurch. And I knew the cost of that school. So all along in my life, I've gone, oh my gosh, I've got to pay my mum back. I've got to figure out how I pay my mum back. And I wasn't paying her back with good grades. I can tell you that much. And so I found my way in the tech industry, and I started working for a company called HP. And I worked in Sydney and I worked in London. And during that time, I was recognizing more and more that the tech industry of itself is always thinking about innovation, always thinking about what's next, what's next. How do we hit the next frontier, the next emerging technology? How do we increase shareholder returns? How do we increase dividends and profit and everything else? And I was thinking about who's being left behind? Who's not already at the start line? And it was called the tech gap to begin with, and then it became the digital divide. And I was really finding it harder and harder to work for an organization where, obviously, again, as a system, as a company, it's built to think about how is it growing. And I was thinking about, well, who's being slowed down by every step we take forward. And so I ended up actually getting quite depressed in my corporate role. I was strategic planner of United Kingdom and Ireland in London, and I was only 24. I found it really hard to reconcile my values mixed with my context that I was working in. And I got quite depressed. I decided to email the Prime Minister actually on LinkedIn. It was Jacinda at the time. And I asked her, what are you doing to protect those most at risk of being displaced by the fourth industrial revolution? Yada, yada. Like, who can I talk to? What's going on? And I didn't get a reply, which is no surprise. But that was the start of me asking those questions and realizing my values were getting louder, no matter how the context was trying to almost pull me in and be like, oh, you just get paid more and just da da da. I was like, this is not it. And so I ended up moving to San Diego, working for that company. And I was on a work trip in Los Angeles at the time. And I was was in Hollywood with myself and some other colleagues. And myself and another colleague, we actually got drugged, kidnapped, and robbed. So that was one situation that happened when I was 26 working overseas. And that kind of stuff is life-changing stuff. That kind of stuff is deeply traumatic. And for me, it made me really ask myself, had anything more sinister have happened, would I have been proud of where I was? And it was a really easy answer. It was no. This, to me, is not what success looks like or feels like, or it's not what fulfillment looks like or feels like. So I quit my six-figure, I quit my ridiculous corporate salary, and I decided to move back to Aotearoa and do something to make a difference. And I didn't know what that looked like at the time. I landed back in February 2020, just before COVID, and I actually stopped by Africa and worked in Ghana for a little bit. I came home and it was a calling to come home to serve. Again, I never wanted to be someone that comes home and goes, oh, I know what to do, when it's like, hold on, I haven't been home for over 5 years. And I also want to get to know what's the soil here? What's the need here? What are the conditions here? And then thinking about where do you plant the seed and what water is needed and what sunshine's needed. And so that's really where my journey of them birthing Fale came from. I spent 3 years with a full-time job with Fale on the side before I was able to even go full-time. So I've been in this for over 6 years now. And not a lot of people talk about the prelude to actually the main event when it comes to entrepreneurship. Like, so often you have the idea way earlier on before you can actually go full-time on the execution. And so often you're just chipping away at it, trying to figure it out, doing your problem exploration, getting resource ready, getting your relationships ready, getting your community ready for what you ultimately want to bring into the world and birth into the world. And so, yeah, a lot of those experiences have then shaped my willingness and I guess my sense that nothing could have been worse than where I was. Like, anything was going to be better than feeling so incredibly empty and feeling like I was dead while still alive, feeling like I was a robot that put into a box and that's all they ever want from you. And so thinking about dreaming and thinking about changing and thinking about trying, all I was trying to do was just try and be bold and brave enough to try in a context which is, we still have a lot of tall poppy syndrome. There is a lot of jealousy. There's a lot of judgment from anyone that wants to dream differently and has the courage to go out and actually back themselves and talk about it. And I experienced a lot of judgment for years until I started winning the awards. And it's so ironic. I had people coming up to me after we won awards for our company, and they were apologizing for how they treated me when I first moved back to New Zealand. Humans, huh? So it's been a really tough journey to even get to the point of building Fibre Fale, and then it's definitely been an incredibly hard journey to have created what we have. And we've been so successful in our first 3 years, and I'm so proud of everything we've done. And at the same time, it's only been 3 years and the world is getting tougher and tougher to do social change, to be ethical, to be a values-led leader. The system itself has regressed and has actually made it far more challenging to be able to stay operating with that mindset and operating with that type of a business when, again, the context of capitalism is really pulling us away from that. And conversations that were really live and felt like they were making major progress around equity, inclusion, diversity, justice, belonging, all of those conversations have not only dried up and dissolved, but they're also now being penalized, which that is a scary world to be operating in right now.
So, Julia, you talked about your different roles in the past, but also today, and it feels like you've had the opportunity, well, you created the opportunity for yourself to contribute at so many different points in the system, sector-wise, but also thinking about more vertically, like in committee all the way to the board. What do you feel you've learned from all of these experiences?
Okay, the first thing I want to say that's a little bit controversial is the higher you go, the better it doesn't get. So I know that might be naughty to say that out loud, but I honestly thought that when you make it up at the governance level and the board level, people are going to be very well behaved. They're going to be incredibly values led because they've made it that high up in their careers and they're in these incredibly privileged positions of power. What I've unfortunately learned is that unethical behavior is more flagrant because you are at a privileged position of power that you think you can almost operate above and beyond what's acceptable because of how long you've been operating in the system and you've had power or privilege or resource. So that has been one thing that has, again, shaped my, I felt like I had a moment last year where I needed to have a funeral for my youth. I needed to grieve my innocence almost because I was like, whoa, this whole language around governance, around directors, around boards is intentionally mystical and mysterious, almost to give it the guise of the elite. And as I walked into some of those spaces, I found people aren't coming correct in the way that I thought they were. This is a different territory. This is an arena. This is actually like a stadium where it's like, you got to fight for your territory, fight for your voice. You've got to be fighting to put down your opinion, your perspective, and holding yourself. And I think that was one thing that, and this is not for all spaces. Again, this is just me sharing my own personal journey. I didn't anticipate to almost be ready to armor up again coming into some of these spaces. I thought, again, innocently, that the higher you go, the better it gets. The more people are operating with high value compasses or codes of conduct, codes of ethics. And actually, that's not always the case. So that's just one point I'll make. One of the other points I'll make is in different areas and different contexts, there's a lot of the same human issues that arise. How do you build community? How do you build belonging on a table? How do you make sure everyone's included? And in some ways that's better facilitated with cultures and communities that already know that. And in other times I recognize that that's not going to be achieved in this space. This space is much more of a transactional space. As an individual of one, when I'm looking at a group of 30 or 15 or 8, actually, I've got to play a different role here. I'm not going to try and take everybody on the journey to get to where I think we should get to or where my community is. But actually, my position right here, it looks like sharing a community voice and a very curated point of view, but knowing that, no, this room might not necessarily be the most inclusive room, but I'm going to come here and do my position or my privilege or my responsibility for the space. And that's what I'm trying to achieve here. So for me, it's knowing what is actually within my circle of control for each opportunity I'm in and not trying to over-exude myself beyond what I think the conditions of the space are ready for. Because I would otherwise burn myself out and be miserable if I thought that every space was going to be a values-led space, or every space was going to be an inclusive space, or every space was going to be an ethical space. They're not. And I've had to ask myself, okay, so if I know that to be true, do I want to participate in this space? Do I want to contribute in this space? Do I want this space to benefit from my presence? Because my absence will leave a message. And when I'm in certain spaces, they are not just benefiting from my capability and from my talent, they're also benefiting from knowing that they're going to get a cultural sign-off attached to my name and a way to say, well, she comes with X people, or the community's watching where she is, so they will feel like they've got approval from me. So I've got to be really careful around where I place myself as well, because it's not just me that I'm operating with. There are a lot of eyes on me and where I go, and they're thinking, oh, okay, well, if she's gone there, then that might be safe for me to go too. So I always have to be playing, again, multiple kind of calculations and considerations, some of which I'm able to talk about, others of which I can only really share in one-to-one or mentoring if somebody asks me. But the level of consideration that goes into what space I'm in and why, and then what am I seeking to achieve based on my values from this space, because it's not the same for every room I'm in, or from every opportunity I'm in, or from every kind of point within the system, different points for different reasons. I hope I've answered the question.
Yeah. It's wonderful. We can hear that you're doing the work you've got the way of the responsibility of working for the community as well, and not just yourself, which is beautiful. You're obviously behaving in a way that's highly strategic, but with so much empathy and emotional intelligence. It's beautiful. Your story is extremely inspirational, Julia. You're also saying, of course, it's a very, very hard road ahead. And think that you mentioned the youthful innocence that we all have, and thinking about the young future leaders. I mean, you're still very early on yourself, but you've had such an incredible journey. Like, what would be your advice, having that full awareness of the system, having that full awareness of how rooted some of these conditions are, and having had that personal struggle yourself, and knowing what for young leaders, what you've already shared so much in terms of, looking at yourself and asking yourself the hard questions and being brave enough to try. What else is there for future leaders to keep in mind in order to contribute to the world?
I know this might sound crazy, but what have you got to lose? Like, the world as it already stands is not benefiting anyone. It's not benefiting. It is only benefiting a very small handful of mega rich individuals. And so what have we got to lose by believing in our dream, by believing in our imagination, by believing that the future could and should look different? What have we got to lose? Because as it currently stands, the system, the world, is not being designed in our favor, is not being designed in our interest, is not being designed for collective good, planetary good, spiritual good, ancestral good. Like, it's not. So going beyond, there's a lot of quotes I think about around, rather than be what you cannot see, be the system healing. As I heal, the system heals. So work on yourself, do your inner work in order to shift your outer world. Try, because choosing not to try is still a choice. And accepting the status quo as it currently stands is choosing to be a passive bystander. And then lastly, and what do you have to lose? Because the current world and how it's being shaped and set up is not working in your favor. And therefore, putting your energy into activating a life of which you believe in, of which you've designed, of which you've imagined, whether or not it's for your family good, your community good, or the collective good. What have you got to lose by living with that level of activation and agency and autonomy and self-determination, ultimately?
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Julia. Thank you for listening. This was an episode of Ethical Leadership, Voices of Aotearoa, New Zealand, a podcast collection commissioned by the Brian Picot Chair in Ethical Leadership, Aritahi, at Victoria University of Wellington. I hope you enjoy the episodes as much as I'm enjoying the fabulous conversations with our guest speakers. Stay tuned for more.